Freedom. A two-syllable word with 1,000 meanings. Which matters more, my freedom to swing my fist, or my freedom to punch you in the face? Scholars remain divided.
Is it okay to punch a Nazi in the face? Leading ethicist weighs in. Is it okay to put a cat in a bag and slam it against the wall? I don't know. Leading ethicists haven't written an article about it.
But there's one type of freedom that's the queen of freedom, yea, the robust trunk and turgid root of the great tree of liberty itself, and that is our most fundamental freedom, the freedom of speech. Unfortunately, that freedom is now under attack by leftists. I mean, just look at all these hot takes. The left is killing free speech.
So I'm not going to say it. Now, should Bill Maher be fired for saying it? I don't know.
The left is silencing free speech.
We want them to fear the social consequences of being an awful person. Those consequences could include being ostracized or ridiculed, or they could include being punched in the face.
The left turned against free speech.
Nazis aren't just someone with a different opinion. Stopping genocide means occasionally infringing on someone's freedoms by punching them in the fucking head. It's not a price I want to have to pay, but it's the people who want to do the genocide that have forced that price to be paid.
The left wants to suppress free speech.
This is just your daily reminder that it's totally fine to punch Nazis.
The left is assaulting free speech.
If you see a Nazi, punch a Nazi.
The left is stifling free speech.
Some positions simply cannot be entertained, let alone argued against. There is this fallacy on the left around reasoned debate.
The left is silencing free speech.
Those violent protests erupting overnight at UC Berkeley.
Leftist terrorists are at war with free speech Gooby.
Fuck! This sounds pretty bad.
Nah, it's fine, don't worry about it.
Luckily, one hero has emerged to champion freedom once again.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't call myself a hero, but I'm flattered, genuinely. That was a very nice sentiment you just...
And that man is no less than YouTube's own Dave Rubin.
Yeah, of course it's Dave. Damn it.
A man who loves freedom more than life itself. A man who may disapprove of what you say, but will defend to the death your right to appear on his program and spout racist bullshit without interruption or objection. A man who's prepared to water the tree of liberty with his own tears.
Are you tearing up? You did something. No, it's the lights are getting me.
Was it the lights, Dave? Are you sure it wasn't freedom? So here's the thing. I know and have known a lot of people who are educated, sincere, and sympathetic to Rubin's point of view, so I think it's worth engaging.
So your primary consideration in whether or not this point of view was worth engaging was not the point of view, but the holders of the point of view. More relevant than what the idea is who holds the idea.
And Dave, he's not a Nazi.
If Rubin were a Nazi, then his ideas would not be worth responding to. Where's the logic there? Who benefits by you not addressing a person or idea you disagree with? At this point, you might find this observation to be uncharitably pedantic. I'm being too literal with what Contra is saying. But Contra's emphasizing of the speaker over the speech is a recurring theme throughout the rest of the video.
So, you know what, Dave? Pull up a seat. Let's talk. Oh, hold on. I'll make you a drink.
Well, I'm not the heroic Dave Rubin, but I am the person responding to the video. So I'm going to accept that drink on Dave's behalf. I'm also going to cut out large portions of your video and summarize points when necessary because I think you take too long. A link to the original, or a mirrored version of the original, will be available down in the description. False flagging is bullshit. Contra's ideas are not so robust that you need to skirt the debate process in order to defeat him. Or maybe you agree with him. The S-Jew is silencing me, so my only recourse is to silence him back. Grow a spine. Anyway, Contra, you were saying something about Hitchens.
The point is, if I choose Hitchens as the representative of my opponent's position on free speech, surely no one can accuse me of strawmanning.
No single representative is going to encapsulate the whole of your political opposition, but as far as defenders of free speech go, Hitch is definitely a strong one, so I'm not going to have any problem with this, so long as you adequately represent Hitchen's position.
It's not just the right of the person who speaks to be heard. It is the right of everyone in the audience to listen and to hear. And every time you silence somebody, you make yourself a prisoner of your own action because you deny yourself the right to hear something.
So free speech isn't just protection against laws regulating expression, it's also the right of any speaker to a platform and the right of an audience to hear. So not only does a Holocaust denier have a right to speak, but, in this view, because what they say is marginal, we actually have a duty to provide special protections to make sure that what they have to say is heard.
That person's right to speak must be given extra protection, because what he has to say must have taken him some effort to come up with, might contain a grain of historical truth, might in any case give people to think about why do they know what they already think they know. How do I know that I know this, except that I've always been taught this and never heard anything else?
I like that you and Hitchens have this very advanced conception of free speech. The idea that we should protect and perhaps even amplify minority viewpoints is one that I share. So great, we actually start from a point of philosophical agreement. Where we disagree is in the application.
You think you and Hitchens are at a point of philosophical agreement because you both want to protect minority viewpoints, yet there is a huge divide between what you think a minority viewpoint is and what Hitchens thinks a minority viewpoint is. To Hitchens, minority describes the viewpoint, as in this is a fringe position that goes against mainstream thought. He's talking about the idea.
The main point of contention being which speakers are truly marginalized and in need of special protection.
To Hitchens, I'd imagine that would be the speakers with the minority viewpoint, because Hitchens is focused on the idea, not the person. If I were to ask you what perspectives you found marginalized, would you answer with particular perspectives, or attributes holders of those perspectives have, such as their race, or their gender, or their sexuality? Black, for example, does not refer to a particular perspective. What is the black view of abortion? What's the gay view on climate change? What's the female perspective on open borders? Do you see how these questions are fucking stupid? Hopefully that absurdity illustrates that you and Hitch are not using minority viewpoint to refer to the same kind of minority.
And I think the best way to flesh out that disagreement is to consider the accusations that the left has it out for free speech. In my experience, the big pieces of evidence usually brought out against the social justice warrior left are prohibitions against hate speech, trigger warnings, safe spaces, and deplatforming. In this video, I'll cover hate speech.
I don't know that I'll make responses to the other 3 videos in this series, but since I already covered deplatforming fairly in depth in my last response to Steve Shives, I'm going to quickly touch on trigger warnings and safe spaces right now. Trigger warnings would not be an impediment to free speech unless they became mandatory in some way, as in I would face repercussions for not including them. Voluntary inclusion of trigger warnings are not a barrier to free speech. That is an exercise in free speech. Same with safe spaces. So long as the safe spaces aren't being injected into public spaces, and they aren't preventing people in the public from saying what they'd like, they are not a barrier to free speech. Unless you attempt to expand that safe space to the point where it encompasses me, I don't care. Have your safe space. That's not causing me any imposition. However, I expect that your next 2 videos would be much in the same vein as this one, as in trigger warnings need to be mandated, or else that negatively impacts the speech of those who suffer from triggers, and safe spaces need to be widespread, or else that negatively impacts the free speech of those who require safe spaces. Because triggers and unsafe spaces are silencing. Well, then I still won't need to respond to those videos because we'll get to that soon enough.
Objection 1. Hate speech prohibitions. Unlike the accusations regarding trigger warnings and safe spaces, the suggestion that the prohibition of hate speech violates the right to free speech is at least not completely frivolous. I think this is worth taking seriously.
No shit. The prohibition of any kind of speech is necessarily antithetical to free speech. Free and prohibited are opposites.
Now, free speech prohibitions exist at 3 levels. At the highest level, there are legal prohibitions, such as the prohibitions against displaying Nazi imagery, which have allowed Nazis to get my anti-Nazi videos banned in much of Europe. Speaking as a freedom-loving American, I find these laws clearly in violation of what the right to free speech protects. I mean, what? The Führer is gonna make it illegal to display a swastika now? What is this, Nazi Germany?
This illustrates an incredibly important point. You cannot argue against a position unless you allow that position to be freely expressed. Because if the position can't be expressed, you can't know what it is, and if you can't know what it is, you have no grounds to disagree with it. If Contra makes an anti-Nazi video, he needs to include what the Nazi's position is, or else he has no way of arguing against it or communicating his argument to his audience. In order to justifiably be anti-Nazi, Nazis need to be allowed to speak. I bring this up on the legal level, but this doesn't stop being true on any of the other levels either.
At the middle level, there's institutional prohibitions, such as those that prohibit hate speech in particular settings, such as universities or the workplace. These, I think, are quite a good idea, and I'll explain why in a moment. At the bottom level, there are social restrictions. For instance, there's a lot of social pressure in certain communities not to be racist, sexist, homophobic, and so on. And although not formal rules, these norms can have a silencing effect and place a de facto limitation on the things people are willing to say.
Willing and free are not the same thing. I expect the things I say to have social ramifications, that my speech will affect the opinions others have of me in my social group. Imagine I had an overly sensitive black friend. Clearly, I don't befriend the blacks, calm down, but let's say I did. If I refrain from using the word nigger around him, that's not him silencing me. That's me making the choice to not say the word nigger. If I refrained from saying the word nigger around him because he had told me, if you say the word nigger near me, I will punch you in the face, that would be him silencing me. Which of your 3 levels of prohibition does violence fall under? Potentially any of them, and that's something you don't go into for the rest of the video. By what means are these prohibitions enforced? If the social level of prohibition was enforced through merely social consequences, I wouldn't consider that a prohibition. When your video was removed, that was explicitly someone preventing you from speaking. It was not your choice to abstain from speaking. The consequence of your speech was non-social, that being your video's removal.
For instance, conservatives and classical liberals are constantly complaining to me about how the words transphobe, racist, Islamophobe, and so on are being used to silence them.
There are cases where I can see this being true, because being labeled a racist, for example, can lead to non-social consequences.
Fired.
Punched in the face.
By punching him in the fucking head.
Punch Nazis.
Punch a Nazi. Cannot be entertained.
These are the kinds of consequences for speech I would consider prohibitive. And this is the kind of enforcement that the left has been recently engaging in.
Those violent protests erupting overnight at UC Berkeley.
This behavior is not exclusive to the left, and it's not present in every area of the left, but it is the left that is most vocal in its endorsement of these kinds of enforcement mechanisms. All that being said, I don't think violent retaliation is the kind of social enforcement Contra is referring to. Even if that's the kind of enforcement the left employs that I have the greatest issue with. For the sake of exploring this topic, let's ignore the non-social consequences that can arise from speech. Now, are conservatives or classical liberals being silenced when they're called transphobic, racist, or Islamophobic? No. If you choose not to speak because you don't want to be labeled as something, that is not you being silenced. You would be silenced if that choice was taken from you.
And in a sense, they're kind of right. I mean, people are saying those things to you because they want you to stop saying what you're saying.
And with that, Contra reaffirms that social justice warriors don't give a fuck about language's descriptive ability. Why was it you were last called a racist, or a transphobe, or an Islamophobe? Was it because you said or did something racist, transphobic, or Islamophobic? Probably not. In all likelihood, you were called that merely because you said something someone else didn't like. The validity of the claim is secondary to the accuser's feelings.
But of course, this is pretty microscopic as far as restrictions on free speech go. So I guess you might say it's a sort of free speech microaggression, right? And that is what it is. It's a subtle, indirect way of trying to get you not to say a certain thing. So great, I want to congratulate conservatives on independently discovering the idea of microaggressions.
I have to say, as far as strategies for speech control go, this is a really shit one. Because what's the natural reaction to being told not to say something? Now you want to say it. Human psychology would indicate that this strategy is going to result in the opposite of what you want. Additionally, the more terms like racist, transphobe, and Islamophobe are thrown around, the less power they have. If both the Klansman and the white girl wearing dreads are racist, who cares about being called racist?
But if you're willing to grant that words like Islamophobia can have a silencing effect,
I'm not.
You should also be willing to grant that small acts of racism, sexism, homophobia, and so on can likewise suppress the speech of marginalized people. For instance, I constantly hear from women, trans, and gender non-conforming people that they've thought of making YouTube videos, but they just don't want to deal with the hate, the trolls, the constant misogyny and attacks on gender identity, the public shaming, and genderqueer and feminist cringe compilations, and so they just avoid speaking up on YouTube altogether.
Why would women, trans, or gender non-conforming people be worried about being included in a feminist cringe compilation? I was under the impression that such compilations were about feminists, not women. Do you think feminism to be one of those marginalized perspectives? And by extension, do you think there should be a prohibition, social or otherwise, on anti-feminist speech?
So in a sense, these people are being silenced by the misogynistic and transphobic atmosphere, in the same way that your average YouTube shitlord would probably feel pretty alone and silenced in a gender studies class with 19 women complaining about sexist men.
I shall rebut your non-specific anecdotal testimonies with my own specific anecdotal testimonies. Hello, Jeff, Iseth, Dankula, and Danny.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Hey ho.
Yep. G'day, Anti-Sleeper. What's up, man? You know, it's coming up to midnight. You're really keeping me awake.
Welcome to the low point of your YouTube careers. I have 2 questions for each of you that you may answer however you'd like. Firstly, have you ever been on the receiving end of racial, gender, or sexual-based insults or trolling?
Trolling or insults? Yeah, no, actually that happens quite a bit to me. That happens pretty much almost on a daily basis. There are some specific examples I could think of. There have been lots of times where I've made videos, and it doesn't even have to be necessarily about, identity politics. It could be, debunking bad pseudoscience, and people will inevitably bring up my race or my gender as some way to shut me down. Most notably, one of the biggest ones that ever happened to me was Trey Melvin. He's a YouTuber with over 2 million subscribers, and he was trying to tell me that a homeless white person has more privilege than he does, even though the fucker's rich. As if he could just quantify privilege and take away the privilege of having money. And he was very dismissive of me. Very. Purely because I was white.
I had this super fancy pamphlet that told me that if you sign up on YouTube and make videos as a girl, you get super badass harassment. And I end up here, and I make videos, and I just don't get any. If you look at my videos, it's so fucking civilized. Some nice debates, some disagreements, some little teenager jerking off on my boobs, which by the way is not harassment. And then, yeah, sure, the occasional wacko Muslim who tells me he's gonna rape my dad. My dad! An objectively speaking, ugly, old, hairy fatty. I have a total of 4 people blocked. 3 because their comments spam my bloody inbox, and the 4th is Steve Shives. If I wouldn't read too much BuzzFeed, I would nearly conclude that people get abused because of their ideas and not because of their body bits.
Every day. Yeah, apparently because I'm a cis white male scum, my opinions don't matter as much as everyone else's because I've had it too good for too long.
Well, yes, of course. I mean, I have ever been on the internet. So, what was it again? It was insults and trolling based off of your race, your sex, and your sexuality. That was it. Well, I'm white, I've been called white trash, and I've been told that just based on my skin color and I'm an evil oppressor. I'd consider that pretty insulting. I'm male, and I've had plenty of feminists telling me they want to drink my male tears. I'm bisexual, and actually that's the only one I haven't had any insults or trolling off of that I can think of. And it's the only one that's meant to make me part of an oppressed minority. Go figure, huh?
Secondly, do you think such comments have a silencing effect, and do you think they constitute an infringement on your free speech?
If you get properly harassed, that is annoying, upsetting, and sometimes quite scary. But it doesn't really stop you from speaking. Unless you're actually getting threatened by people who want to physically attack you in real life, there is no infringement on your free speech.
No, I really don't think so. The truth of the matter is that anybody can say these types of things to me. I get called a racist or a sexist or a homophobe or a transphobe, none of which is true, of course. But people can say that to me as much as they want. Them telling me that I am a racist doesn't make me a racist. Them saying I'm sexist doesn't make me sexist, because I know who I am and I know what I am. So no, it doesn't silence me at all. And even at the point where I had, for instance, like Trey Melvin, he blasted that out to his massive following of followers. You should have seen the shitstorm, the flood of people hurling abuse, the threats of violence, all sorts of crazy shit. I've gotten rape threats, death threats, all sorts of stuff. Did it make me want to be silenced? No, it didn't. But my personality is the kind that lends itself to doing this type of work. I'm more inspired and more energized to get my points of view out there the more people try and push back against it with bad arguments, because that means that I'm getting somewhere. It means that in some way I'm being effective. So does it silence me? No. Does it affect me? Sometimes. Sometimes it does. But those are the times where I decide that I'm just going to take a break. And I think that's just everyone's personal responsibility when they're doing something like this online. When you become a public figure, sometimes you just need to take a break. And that's the best thing you can do for yourself. Self-care is really important.
No, if you want to go in public and you want to say things and everyone has the right to debate, critique or mock your points, that's just the way it goes. Unless people are actually going to your house and tying you up and preventing you from using the computer and uploading videos, then the idea that that is preventing you from exercising your right to free speech is bullshit. Right? Nothing's preventing you from posting online. If people critique it, that doesn't make you stop. That just seems more of a personal issue. Oh, I don't want to upload in case people say mean things about my content. Well, then YouTube isn't the fucking place for you. I think the main point I want to put across is, like, if you put things out on the internet or put things out in the public, people will critique it, mock it, debate it, or agree with it, and all of the above things. It's a case of the decision of whether or not to keep going isn't made by other people. It comes down to the YouTuber themselves. Nothing is actually preventing you from uploading, and if you feel like you don't want to do anything on YouTube because you're worried about mean comments, well, that's just your own fault for being a pussy.
No. Insults are themselves speech. How could speech infringe on the right to free speech? If you start going down that path, you're going to run into some paradoxes pretty fucking quickly. Anti-sleeper, what kind of intellectual klutz are you responding to here? Okay, there is a concept of cultural free speech that I do support, that we shouldn't just defend free speech in the laws, but we should also avoid imposing any consequences, even social consequences, on people for the opinions they hold. I support that. But those consequences that we should avoid should not themselves include speech, because paradox previously referred to. Oh man, this is only a really short thing, but I already think I should have brought more beer.
Now, when I bring this up with classical liberals, they uniformly respond, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. The internet's just like that. Why can't you just deal with it? To which I respond, why can't you just deal with being called a racist on college campuses? Academia's just like that. And whatever you say to that, there's the answer to your question.
Did you just compare academia to the comment section of a YouTube video? I find that comparison highly uncharitable. YouTube comment sections have at least some credibility left.
So if you adopt a sophisticated view of free speech, you have to contend with the following contradictory situation. There are many instances where you have to choose between suppressing one person's speech or another's. The fact is, there is no true neutral when it comes to free speech. It's literally impossible to protect everyone's speech equally because some forms of speech tend to dampen other forms of speech. So there comes a point where you have to choose whose side you're on.
Earlier, I brought up how this notion of competing speech would be applicable to feminism and anti-feminism, but this could be applied to basically any political issue. Pro-lifers versus pro-choicers. Climate change proponents versus climate change deniers. Capitalists versus communists. If we're to prohibit one side's speech in order for it to not silence the speech of the other, are you not heralding in the end of discourse? Have you ever heard of those anecdotes about the biology professor who was too scared to speak up about his skepticism towards Darwinian evolution? Do we need to prohibit the speech of evolutionists in order to make him feel comfortable enough to express his views? Hopefully you think that sounds insane.
And I'm not talking about passing laws here, I'm talking about establishing norms of discourse.
And how would these norms of discourse be established if not by arguing your case and persuading people to your position? Is that not what's already happening? Is that not essentially what politics is? Where does the prohibition come into play?
And what I notice about you, Dave, and about much of your audience, is you only ever seem to stand up for the right of people not to be silenced by slurs like racist and transphobe. And in fact, you present the topic like it's the most important political issue in the world right now.
No one has the right to not be called a transphobe. You can't control what others call you. The argument that I hear most often is that it's bad to label people as transphobic and racist when they're not. And the bar for transphobia and racism has been set too low. Show me where Dave Rubin has ever argued for the right to not be called a racist.
But on the subject of how bigoted attitudes and speech may silence women, people of color, queer people, and other marginalized groups, you seem to have absolutely nothing to say.
Isn't one of the premises that distinguishes feminism from most other positions the premise that women are marginalized? Even if we were to accept the premise that some kinds of speech can dampen other kinds of speech, it would only make sense to prohibit misogyny if you were already a feminist. Why do all roads seem to lead to feminism is the only acceptable position, and if you don't endorse the prohibition of my opponent's speech, you're a bigot?
And I can't help but look at this and conclude that you've taken a side in an ideological battle, while pretending all the way that you're simply defending the supposedly neutral value of free speech. Don't think we don't notice whose speech you rush to defend, and who you tell to take the abuse and get over it.
There is a conflation between prohibition and abuse occurring here. I'm okay with you telling Richard Spencer to suck up and take the abuse, up until the point where that abuse becomes physical. You've already stated that you are merely referring to norms of discourse, but the topic being explored is whether or not the left supports free speech, and a very vocal section of the left does not.
But I think you can learn a lot about a person's politics by which speech they choose to defend and which speech they choose to shut down. So when I see people defending Richard Spencer and acting like the Declaration of Human Rights has gone up in flames because of campus or workplace hate speech prohibitions, while saying absolutely nothing about the way hate speech itself can be silencing, I don't see neutral defenders of free speech. I see people who have taken a side, and it's not the right side.
How did you decide which side was right? Presumably you employed some process of weighing the merits of either side and then coming down on one more so than the other. How would you like others to determine which side is the right side? You don't. You want others to simply follow your decision. I don't see how you could possibly be advocating for anything else given that you're trying to restrict people's access to the other side of the issue. No one should be so certain in their position that they block themselves or others off from all dissenting views. We don't support the speech of Nazis for the Nazis' sake, but for our sake, for everyone's sake. The principle of free speech endorses everyone's right to speak, and its advocates strive to do the same.
Fascist crackpot. We're here. We're not here to talk to you. Throw him out.
Sir.
Throw him out.
Sir.
Security.
Even if they're not perfectly consistent in their advocacy.
Go subscribe to Anti-Sleeper. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, or I will butt fuck you. That's it. I'm done. That's it. That's all you're getting from me.